It was one of those evenings when the streets were quieter than usual. The sun had already dipped below the horizon, leaving behind a soft orange glow that lingered over the small town. A light breeze moved through the narrow streets, carrying with it the faint smell of bread, baking and coffee brewing from nearby shops. People were heading home after a long day, and the usual chatter of the town had settled into calm murmurs. In the corner of this town, a modest little restaurant sat tucked between a bookstore and a flower shop. Its wooden sign creaked slightly as it swayed with the wind, and the warm light from its windows spilled out onto the cobblestone street. The owner, a middle-aged man with a tired yet kind expression, was wiping down the tables inside. He had seen better days, when the restaurant was full and busy every evening, but lately business had slowed. A few regular customers still came, but the air felt heavier with quiet than he liked. As he stacked plates and straightened chairs, he noticed someone lingering just outside the doorway. At first, he thought it was a passerby, maybe someone looking for a shortcut through the street. But the figure did not move. The man, dressed in worn clothes that had seen many seasons, stood still and watched the restaurant. His shoes were old and scuffed, his coat thin and patched in several places. There was a weight in his posture, fatigue that spoke of nights spent walking streets instead of sleeping in a warm bed. The owner hesitated. Many people had passed by over the years, some with their own troubles, some just curious about the restaurant's glow. But this man felt different. There was a quiet dignity about him, even in his worn state. The owner could see the faint lines of worry etched across his face, and his eyes carried stories the owner couldn't even imagine. After a moment, the man stepped forward and opened the door slowly. It creaked as if it had not been used much that day. A soft, nervous sound of shuffling shoes echoed through the empty restaurant. The few customers who were still eating looked up curiously, some exchanging uneasy glances. It was unusual to see someone like this in a restaurant, especially at this hour. The man spoke softly, almost hesitantly. "Excuse me? I was wondering if I could have something to eat," he said. His voice was quiet but steady, polite, without begging or whining. "Anything, even leftovers. I haven't had a proper meal in a long time." The owner felt a mix of emotions. He had dealt with beggars before, and some had been rude, demanding, or dishonest. But there was something different about this man. He didn't ask for money, didn't make a scene, and he had a calm presence that seemed to respect the space around him. The owner looked around the restaurant, noticing how the other customers were watching silently, some with curiosity, others with discomfort. He wasn't sure what to do. "I don't usually give away food for free," the owner said slowly, trying to find the right words. "But maybe I can give you something small. Sit down over there," he added, gesturing to an empty table near the corner. The man nodded gratefully and moved carefully toward the table, his hands folded in front of him. He sat down, his eyes scanning the room with quiet observation. There was no sense of entitlement in him, only a quiet hunger, both physical and perhaps emotional. The owner went into the kitchen to prepare a simple plate of food, some bread, a bit of soup, and a few vegetables. It wasn't much, but it was enough for one meal. He made sure it was warm. While the owner worked, he couldn't help but glance at the man from time to time. There was something about him that felt out of place in the best way, like a story waiting to be told. The way he held himself, the careful movements, the way he seemed to notice the smallest details made the owner feel a strange mix of curiosity and respect. It wasn't just hunger he carried. It was something deeper, something invisible, but very real. The plate of food was set down gently in front of the man. "Here, this is all I can offer right now," the owner said. The man looked at the plate, then up at the owner, and for a moment he didn't speak. Then he smiled softly, a small curve of his lips that lit up his worn face just slightly. "Thank you," he said simply. He picked up the bread and began to eat carefully, savoring each bite as if he hadn't had food like this in months. The owner watched him, noticing the gratitude in his eyes and the quiet humility in his manner. It was not the way of someone used to receiving charity. It was the way of someone who had learned to appreciate even the smallest kindness as the man ate. The restaurant seemed to change. The quiet murmur of the customers returned, but there was a new energy in the room, a subtle warmth. The presence of this man, so ordinary in appearance yet extraordinary in demeanor, had shifted something in the atmosphere. People watched him, some with sympathy, some with curiosity, but all with a sense of recognition that he was more than what they first assumed. After a while, the man finished his meal and looked around the room. His eyes lingered on an old piano in the corner. It was not used often, mostly for decoration, but it sat there with its polished wood and slightly worn keys. He stood slowly and walked toward it, his movements careful and deliberate, as if approaching something sacred. The owner, who had been wiping tables and straightening chairs, froze for a moment. He watched the man sit at the piano and place his hands lightly on the keys. He didn't press a single note, not yet. But the way he positioned himself suggested familiarity. As if he had spent years with this instrument. The customers began to notice too. Some leaned forward slightly, unsure of what to expect. The restaurant, already quiet, became almost still. Even the clinking of dishes from the kitchen seemed to fade as the man's fingers hovered above the keys. It was a moment suspended in time, filled with a strange, quiet anticipation. Then, almost imperceptibly, he pressed a key. A single note rang out, pure and soft, filling the room with a sound that seemed to catch everyone off guard. It was delicate but full of emotion, as if it carried the weight of untold stories. The note lingered in the air. The owner felt a shiver run down his spine. The man continued to play, slowly at first, testing the piano, letting the sound fill the room. Then the music grew, gentle at first, then richer, more complex. Each note seemed to speak, to tell a story that words could not capture. Customers stopped their conversations, even those who were quietly eating, and listened. The sounds were not just music, they were feelings, memories, moments of joy and sorrow, blended into a melody that resonated deeply. The owner stood near the doorway, unsure whether to speak or simply watch. He had heard music before, live performances and recordings, but nothing like this. It was raw, alive, and profoundly human. The man at the piano did not look like a musician in the traditional sense. But every movement, every note spoke of someone who had devoted a lifetime to this art, someone whose soul was entwined with music itself. As the song continued, the owner noticed the customers' reactions. Eyes widened, some hands went to mouths in surprise, others leaned closer to hear better. The music seemed to connect them all in a shared moment, bridging gaps between strangers, between social status, between the ordinary and the extraordinary. The man at the piano was not just playing for himself. He was offering a gift, and everyone in the room felt it. When the final note lingered and faded, the room was silent again. The weight of what had just happened hung in the air. The owner felt his heart beating faster, and even the regular customers seemed stunned. The man at the piano looked around quietly, a hint of humility in his expression. There was no boastfulness, no demand for applause, just a calm, quiet presence, as if he had simply shared what he could. And that was enough. The owner approached slowly, unsure what to say. I don't know what to say, he admitted. That was incredible. I've never heard anything like it. The man gave a small nod, his eyes soft, as if he had expected no more than a simple acknowledgement. I just wanted to play, he said quietly. Music. It's all I have. I didn't mean to trouble anyone. You haven't troubled anyone? The owner said quickly. Well, I don't even have words. That was amazing. He paused, searching for the right expression. You should play more often. People would come just to hear you. The man looked down at his hands, resting gently on the piano keys. A small smile appeared, almost shy, but it was there. Thank you, he said simply. I would like that. For the rest of the evening, the restaurant seemed lighter, warmer. The man stayed quietly, sometimes speaking a word or two, sometimes just sitting at the piano resting. The customers left that night with a story to tell, a memory of something unexpected and beautiful. And the owner, who had been worried about the slow nights and empty tables, realized that this man had brought something far more valuable than money or popularity. He had brought life, spirit, and a reminder that even in quiet, ordinary places, extraordinary moments could appear when least expected. And so, the beggar who had come for a simple meal had turned an ordinary evening into something unforgettable. Something that would linger in the hearts of everyone present, long after the lights of the restaurant had dimmed. The next morning, the restaurant opened as usual. The sun rose slowly, casting a soft, golden light across the tables and chairs, highlighting the polished wood and the little corners where dust had gathered overnight. The owner moved around the space, arranging menus and wiping down surfaces, his mind still replaying the events of the previous night. The memory of the man at the piano, playing so effortlessly, lingered like a melody that refused to fade. He had not stopped thinking about it. Who was this man? Where had he come from? How could someone living on the streets possess such talent? The questions ran through his mind as he prepared breakfast for the early customers. Each clink of a plate and rustle of a napkin reminded him of the stillness and the beauty of the music that had filled the restaurant the night before. As he set down the last cup of coffee for a regular customer, a soft knock came at the door. The owner looked up, expecting perhaps another early visitor, but the sight that met his eyes made him pause. It was the same man, the one who had played the piano. His coat looked a little cleaner, or perhaps the light made it appear so, but his expression carried the same calm, almost quiet determination. He stepped inside slowly, hesitating, as if unsure he was welcome. The owner motioned toward the empty table near the piano, and the man nodded, moving over with a careful, deliberate step. He sat down and placed his hands in his lap, looking around with the same observant gaze that had made the owner feel curious and unsettled the night before. "Good morning," the owner said. You don't have to sit here. I wasn't expecting anyone so early." "I know," the man replied softly. His voice was calm, but there was an undercurrent of resolve in it. I wanted to ask you something." The owner stopped, wiping his hands on a cloth. He leaned slightly on the counter, unsure what the request might be. "Sure. Anything," he said, though his curiosity was piqued. The man looked toward the piano, then back at the owner. "I was wondering if I could play a song, a full song, not just a few notes. In exchange, could I have a meal?" The words made the owner blink. He had expected requests for food, maybe for spare change, perhaps even for work in exchange for a meal. But this was different. A meal in exchange for music. It sounded unusual, almost like a barter from another time. Play a song. "For a meal?" The owner repeated, his tone careful. "You mean, like a real song? Something long?" The man nodded. "Yes. If you allow it, I can play something that maybe will make people listen differently. I don't mean to trouble you. Music is all I have to offer." The owner paused, glancing around the restaurant. The early customers were few, mostly quiet, sipping their drinks or reading newspapers. No one seemed to mind. Still, the idea felt strange. I suppose we can try," he said slowly. "I don't usually do this, but okay, you can play. Just one song, and then we'll see." The man's face softened slightly, and he inclined his head in gratitude. He rose slowly and moved toward the piano. The owner watched, noting the care in each step, the way the man's fingers hovered over the keys. It was clear he was familiar with the instrument, more familiar than anyone had a right to be if he had been living on the streets. As the first note sounded, the restaurant seemed to hold its breath. It was soft at first, almost tentative, but immediately the melody grew. It wasn't just music. It was a story, one that seemed to float through the room and wrap around the listeners. The owner felt a lump form in his throat. He had heard talented musicians before, but there was a sincerity here that was impossible to ignore. The man played as if the piano was an extension of his own soul. Each note carried emotion, sometimes a quiet sadness, sometimes a gentle joy, sometimes a longing that seemed too deep to be contained in sound alone. Customers who had been quietly eating breakfast stopped and turned toward the piano. Even the regulars who came every morning seemed entranced, unsure of what they were hearing. But certain that it was extraordinary, the owner found himself moving closer. Standing near the counter, but unable to look away, he had never experienced anything like this before. Stranger. Someone who had nothing, transforming a simple room with something so pure and delicate. There was no showmanship, no attempt to impress with speed or loudness. Just music, raw and honest, played with skill and care. When the final note lingered and faded, the room stayed quiet. People blinked, unsure how to respond. The owner felt tears prick at the corners of his eyes. He hadn't expected to be moved so deeply. That was incredible, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. I don't know what to say. The man smiled faintly, almost shyly, and sat back. I hoped you would let me. Thank you for listening, he said. The owner nodded, still in awe. Of course. Of course. Sit down. I'll get your meal. As the owner prepared a fresh plate of food, he couldn't help but glance at the man. There was something about him that felt wrong to call him a beggar. The title didn't fit the dignity, the presence, the quiet confidence he carried. It was as if he had fallen on hard times, yes, but had not lost the core of who he was. The man ate slowly, savoring each bite, but the attention seemed divided. His eyes occasionally returned to the piano, as if he were considering it, thinking of something he might play next. The owner felt a flicker of curiosity and asked cautiously, "Would you want to play again? Another song?" The man looked thoughtful, then shook his head slightly. "Not now. I needed to ask first. If I play without asking, it would not be right." The owner nodded, understanding the restraint and care behind the words. "Of course. Take your time. But you should know, people here. They want to hear you. They would come just to listen." The man paused, as if the idea was foreign. "People, they would really want to hear someone like me?" he asked softly. "Yes," the owner said firmly. "Not someone like you, but you, as you are. People respond to honesty, to skill, to heart. You have all three?" A quiet smile crossed the man's face. It was faint, almost shy, but it was real. For the first time, the owner noticed something else, a hint of relief. A small easing of the weight that seemed to hang over him. It was as if through music he had found a place where he belonged. If only for a moment. Over the next hour, the two of them talked quietly while the man finished his meal. The conversation was careful, respectful, and slow, as if both were aware of the fragile trust growing between them. The man spoke little of his past, only hints of love for music from childhood, a life that had once held promise, and the misfortune that had brought him to the streets. The owner listened, without judgment, only with quiet attention, realizing that some people carry more stories than one could ever imagine. When the plate was empty, and the man pushed it away gently, he rose and moved back toward the piano. He didn't sit immediately, but his hands brushed the keys lightly, as if feeling the texture, remembering shapes, remembering sounds. The owner watched, holding his breath, unsure what was about to happen. Then, in a moment of courage, the man spoke. I have an idea. I know it is strange, but I would like to play for the people outside as well. Not for money, not for charity, just for listening." The owner blinked, surprised. "For outside?" he asked. "Yes," the man said. I think music can reach people even before they enter. Maybe someone passing by will feel something. Maybe it will make a difference, even a small one." The owner considered it. It was unconventional, unexpected, and perhaps risky. But he also knew something fundamental. This man had a gift, and he deserved the chance to share it. Slowly, he nodded. "All right, we can try it. Just play what you feel. That's enough." The man smiled, a little more openly this time. He moved closer to the front of the restaurant, and as he played, a few people walking along the street paused. Their curiosity was caught not by words or signs, but by the music itself. Notes floated into the air, soft at first, then stronger, more confident. It carried through the streets, inviting attention without demand. offering emotion without asking for anything in return. And as the first few passers-by stopped to listen, the owner realized that the simple idea of exchanging a meal for music had become something more. It was no longer just about food. It was about connection, about respect, about allowing someone to share their gift with the world, even from a place where society might have overlooked them. For the first time, the restaurant felt alive in a new way. It was not the clatter of dishes or the chatter of customers that brought energy, it was the music. The human spirit behind it, and the quiet understanding between two people who had discovered that even small acts, like sharing a meal or a song, could change everything. And as the man's hands moved over the keys again, the owner knew that this evening and this song would not be forgotten. The afternoon air was warm, and sunlight streamed through the restaurant windows, casting gentle patterns on the wooden floor. The restaurant was quiet, with only a few early customers scattered at tables, sipping coffee or quietly reading. Outside, the street hummed with the soft sounds of life, a distant dog barking, the occasional chatter of people walking by, the wheels of a bicycle rolling over cobblestones. It was the kind of day that felt ordinary, peaceful, yet full of small possibilities. The man who had come for a simple meal sat near the piano, his coat draped loosely over his shoulders. He hadn't eaten yet, waiting for the right moment, waiting for the owner's nod. Today, he wanted to do more than just play a note or two. Today, he wanted to play a full piece, something that could carry emotion from one heart to another, something that might reach not only the few people inside the restaurant, but those walking past as well. The owner stood a few feet away, watching quietly. He had prepared a small table of food for the man, fresh bread, a bit of cheese, and a warm bowl of soup. But the food was forgotten for now. The restaurant seemed to hold its breath, sensing that something unusual, something extraordinary was about to unfold. The man took a deep breath, letting his hands hover above the keys. His eyes closed for a moment, and in that silence, the restaurant seemed to grow even quieter. Even the customers who had been murmuring softly paused mid-conversation. The air felt electric, not with tension, but with anticipation. Then his fingers pressed down, and the first note emerged, soft, clear, almost delicate. Yet it carried a weight that made it impossible to ignore. One note became two became a flowing line of melody, gentle yet deliberate, each sound touching the room like a whisper that demanded attention at first. It was subtle, almost like a story being told in hushed tones. But gradually, the music grew richer, more confident, layering emotion upon emotion. It was a song that seemed to come from the depths of the man's life, a melody shaped by years of struggle, loss, and fleeting joy. The room, once filled with casual chatter and the clinking of cups, fell silent. People leaned forward, drawn into the sound, drawn into the man's world. The owner could not help but feel the intensity of each note. It was as if the man's entire life, everything he had lost, everything he had hoped for, everything he had carried quietly inside, was being poured into the music. The piano, old and worn in places, responded beautifully, echoing the emotion and filling every corner of the restaurant. Customers would come for breakfast or a quick coffee stopped mid-bite. Even those who had been reading the newspaper laid it aside. Eyes widened, mouths slightly open, hearts quietly shifting. None of them had expected this. None of them had anticipated that a simple act of kindness, a plate of food offered to a stranger, could lead to something so moving. Outside, the sound began to drift beyond the restaurant doors and windows. Passers-by on the street slowed, hearing the music and stopping instinctively. Some turned their heads, trying to see where the melody was coming from. A few people paused completely, listening with curiosity, then recognition, then wonder. The man's playing seemed to bridge the gap between the restaurant and the street, inviting strangers into a world that had been hidden from them, even if just for a few minutes. Inside, the owner stood motionless, heart racing. He had heard many musicians before, seen performances on stages, listened to recordings, but nothing like this. It wasn't just talent or skill, it was something far deeper. It was the way the man conveyed emotion without words, without showing off, without seeking applause. Every chord, every pause, every gentle swell of sound spoke directly to the soul. The customers themselves seemed to transform. People who had been quietly sipping coffee now leaned closer, as if drawn in by an invisible thread. Some reached out, touching their hands to their chests, as if to feel the music inside themselves. Others closed their eyes, letting the sound wash over them, letting it carry away a little of their daily worries. For a moment, the restaurant was no longer a small space of wood and chairs, it was a vessel of emotion. A place where hearts could meet without speaking, where strangers could be connected through the invisible language of music. The man's expression was calm but focused. He did not look at the audience, did not smile or nod, though there was a quiet satisfaction in his movements. His attention was entirely on the piano, on the notes, on the story he was telling. Each section of the song shifted naturally, flowing from soft, almost hesitant passages to powerful, resonant chords that filled the room with a sense of gravity. There were moments of sorrow where the notes hung in the air, lingering like unspoken words. There were moments of hope, bright and soaring, that made even the most tired listener sit a little taller, breathe a little deeper. The owner glanced at the customers, noticing how they reacted. Some wiped tears silently. Others held their hands together in stillness. A young woman, who had been reading a book, had put it aside and stared at the man, captivated. Even the usually quiet old man near the corner of the restaurant had his eyes glued to the piano, as if he had just remembered something long forgotten. Outside, the music grew bolder, carrying itself along the street, drawing more people closer. A young boy tugged at his mother's hand, pointing toward the window. An elderly man leaned on his cane, pausing to let the sound reach him. A couple walking hurriedly for errands stopped in their tracks. Letting the melody pull them away from their worries, even if only briefly, each note reached farther than the man could see, touching lives beyond the restaurant walls. The owner felt something stir deep inside him. It was not only admiration for the man's skill, but also a profound sense of awe at what had happened. A person who had so little, someone who had been overlooked and dismissed by society, could create something so powerful, so moving, that it could affect everyone around him. It was a lesson in humility, in respect, in recognizing the humanity in others, even when it was easy to ignore. The song reached its peak, a series of chords that felt like sunlight breaking through clouds. The music was strong, expressive, and yet still tender, carrying both the pain and the beauty of the man's journey. Every person in the restaurant, and some outside as well, felt a shift in their hearts, as if the room had expanded to include the stories of everyone present. For a moment, the ordinary world, the worries, the schedules, the routines was suspended. There was only the music, flowing, alive, human. Then slowly the final notes came. They were gentle, fading like a whisper on the wind. The man's hands rested on the keys, not with triumph, but with quiet closure. The silence that followed was profound. No one moved immediately. No one spoke. The weight of what had just occurred hung in the room, pressing softly yet insistently on everyone's awareness. The owner was the first to break the silence. He stepped closer to the piano, his eyes wide with awe. That was... I don't have words. I've never heard anything like it, he said, his voice shaking slightly. Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. The man gave a small nod, his expression calm, almost humble. I wanted to share something, he said softly. Music. It has always been all I had. I did not mean to impress or demand. I just wanted to be heard, even for a little while. The customers began to react slowly. One clapped softly, another smiled with tears in their eyes, and soon the room was filled with gentle applause. It was not loud or boisterous, but sincere. People did not cheer for a show, they expressed gratitude for the raw honesty they had just experienced. Even outside, a few passers-by lingered, clapping quietly before moving on. Carrying the memory of the music with them, the owner offered a fresh plate of food to the man, though he hardly needed it now. He understood that what had just happened went beyond hunger or charity. It was a recognition of talent, of humanity, of the extraordinary in someone ordinary. The man accepted the meal with quiet gratitude, but his mind seemed still connected to the piano, to the story he had just told through sound. For the rest of the afternoon, a calm but vibrant energy filled the restaurant. Some customers lingered longer than usual, speaking in hushed tones about what they had just heard. Others simply sat quietly, savoring the atmosphere, letting it sink into them. And the man, once seen only as a beggar, became something else entirely: a musician, a storyteller, a bridge between ordinary life and something beautiful. Something rare. The owner realized that his life, and perhaps the lives of everyone who had witnessed it, had shifted in some subtle, yet undeniable way. Something simple, offering a meal, giving a chance, had led to an experience that no money could buy, no advertisement could promise. A single act of trust had created a ripple, and the ripple had grown into something remarkable. And as the day moved on, sunlight softening into evening, the man at the piano looked around quietly, taking in the small faces, the open hearts, the room alive with emotion. He did not speak of his past, did not seek reward beyond the simple acknowledgement that his music had been heard. For him, it was enough that the music lived, that it reached others, that even for a brief moment, the world had paused to listen. The next morning, the restaurant was filled with a soft, quiet light. Dust motes floated lazily in the beams of sunlight that slipped through the windows, and the usual hum of the town outside had begun again. The owner moved slowly around the restaurant, placing chairs just so and wiping down the counters. He still felt the echo of the music from the previous day lingering in his chest, a feeling that refused to leave. He hadn't seen the man for several hours, but he knew he would return. Somehow, he just knew. The memory of the way the man's fingers had moved across the keys, the emotion in every note, the honesty in every pause, it stayed with him, like a story he couldn't stop thinking about. There was something more behind that music, something the man hadn't said, something he had left unspoken. It wasn't long before the man appeared again. He walked in quietly, slower than usual, his coat wrapped a little tighter around him. The restaurant felt different in his presence, as if the room itself recognized him, remembered him. He didn't sit immediately. Instead, he paused near the piano, letting his eyes rest on the worn wood and the familiar keys. The owner watched him, sensing that today would be different, that the music alone wasn't all the man had to share. I hope I'm not intruding," the man said softly, finally breaking the silence. His voice was calm, but carried a hint of hesitation, as if he were stepping carefully into a part of his life he rarely revealed. "You're not intruding," the owner replied, gesturing toward the chair near the piano. "You're welcome any time. Please, sit." The man hesitated for a moment, then did as asked. He lowered himself into the chair, folding his hands in his lap. His eyes focused somewhere beyond the room, on memories only he could see. The owner approached cautiously, unsure whether to speak or remain silent. There was an unspoken weight in the air, something fragile and significant, something that deserved patience. Finally, the man spoke again. I should tell you more," he said quietly. "Not for sympathy, not for pity, but you should know why. Why I am like this. Why I live the way I do. Why music is all I have left." The owner nodded, understanding that he could only listen. "I'm here to hear," he said. "Whatever you want to share." For a long moment, the man's gaze remained on the piano. Then he began slowly, almost hesitantly. I wasn't always on the streets. I had a life once. A home, a family, a place in the world. Music was part of it. I loved to play. I spent hours at the piano every day. I wanted to teach, to perform, to live a life filled with music. He paused, and the owner noticed the slight tremor in his hands, the tension in his shoulders. The words he spoke were quiet, careful, like a delicate thread being untangled after years of being knotted. But life has a way of taking things away, the man continued. Loss, mistakes, people leaving, opportunities disappearing. It all added up. And then, one day, I found myself with nothing. No home, no place to go, no one to turn to, only the music. Only the piano I could carry in my mind, even if I didn't have one to touch every day. The owner felt a deep empathy stir inside him. He had encountered people in difficult situations before, but hearing the story directly from the man, seeing the calm honesty in his eyes, made it all more real, more human. There was no exaggeration, no attempt to make the story dramatic, just the plain truth, laid bare with dignity and strength. "I know how it must look," the man said quietly, glancing down at his worn coat and scuffed shoes. "I know people see someone on the streets and assume things, but it isn't who I am. I still have music. It's all that keeps me. Myself." The owner nodded slowly. "I understand," he said, "and I think that's what made your music so powerful, because it's real, because it comes from a place most people never reach. It's not just skill. It's life. It's heart." A small smile touched the man's face, brief but genuine. "Thank you, that means more than I can say. Most people just ignore someone like me, or they assume, but you listened. You didn't judge. You offered a meal and allowed me to play. That's rare. That's more than I expected." The owner felt warmth spread through his chest. It wasn't just about giving food. It was about recognizing another person's humanity, about understanding that even in the lowest moments, dignity and talent can survive. The man's story, his honesty, made the restaurant feel larger, as if it had become a space not just for meals, but for truth, for empathy, for human connection. The man leaned back in his chair, his eyes returning to the piano. I want to play again," he said softly. "Not for anyone in particular. Not for money, not for fame. Just to remind myself that I still exist, that I still have something to offer." The owner stepped aside, giving him room. "Play," he said. "Play as much as you want. Everyone here will listen." The man's fingers hovered over the keys for a moment, then he pressed down gently, letting a single note ring out. It was soft, deliberate, almost as if testing the air, testing whether it could still carry sound and emotion the way he remembered. Then another note followed, then another, and soon the piano filled the room with a melody that was richer, deeper, more intricate than the day before. As he played, he spoke quietly, almost to himself, recounting fragments of his past in the music. Each chord carried a memory. The laughter of a family long gone, the warmth of a home that no longer existed, the sorrow of mistakes he could not undo, the fleeting joy of moments that had vanished too quickly. The music told a story the words could not capture, a story of resilience, of survival, of the quiet courage it took to keep moving forward even when life had stripped everything away. The owner watched, transfixed. He realized that the man was not just playing a song, he was revealing his life, one note at a time. The beauty was in the honesty, in the willingness to expose his heart without expecting anything in return. Customers, too, were silent, their eyes wide, their hands still. Some were moved to tears, others simply stared, trying to absorb the weight of what they were hearing. For a moment, it was as if the room contained only the music and the man, and nothing else mattered. The outside world, the problems of daily life, the passing of time, all of it was suspended. There was only the sound, flowing and alive, connecting the hearts of everyone who listened. After a long stretch, the man paused, resting his hands on the keys. His breathing was steady, but there was a quiet exhaustion in his posture. The owner approached slowly, unsure whether to speak or let the moment linger. That was incredible," the owner said finally. "I can't believe how much emotion, how much life can fit into something so simple. It's unlike anything I've ever heard." The man smiled faintly, almost shyly. "Music, it doesn't lie," he said softly. "It tells the truth even when we can't. It shows who we are, even when we feel invisible. That's all I have left, and that's why I play." The owner nodded, feeling a profound respect for the man. You've taught me something today," he said. "Not just about music. About life. About seeing people. Really seeing them. About giving someone a chance, even when it seems small. That matters more than anything else. The man's eyes softened, and he gave a small nod. Thank you, that means a lot. Sometimes one kind act, one moment of understanding, it can change everything. As the day continued, the man remained quietly in the restaurant, sometimes speaking, sometimes simply sitting by the piano. The owner noticed something changing not only in himself but in everyone who had witnessed the music. People were slower to judge, slower to assume. They began to understand that talent, dignity, and human worth were not always visible on the surface. They were sometimes hidden, waiting for a moment to be seen, to be recognized. By the time the afternoon faded into evening, man had shared more of his story through music and quiet words. The owner had begun to understand not only his talent, but the depth of his life, the hardships he had endured, the resilience he had carried, the quiet courage it took to survive and still offer beauty to the world. The restaurant, once a simple place for meals, had become something more, a space of listening, of understanding, and of human connection. And as the man rose from the piano for the evening, his hands resting lightly on the keys, the owner realized that what he had witnessed was not just music, but a living testament to the strength of the human spirit. It was a reminder that even in the hardest circumstances, even when the world seems to have turned its back, something beautiful can endure. Something honest, something true, something that can touch hearts and change lives forever. Evening had settled softly over the town. The sky outside the restaurant was painted in shades of deep orange and violet, and the last few rays of sunlight slipped quietly across the cobblestone streets. Inside, the restaurant was warm and cozy, lit by the soft glow of hanging lamps. The owner moved slowly, arranging chairs and wiping tables, but his mind was elsewhere. He thought about the man who had come to the restaurant days ago, the man who had transformed the quiet space into something alive with music, emotion, and honesty. That evening, the man returned once more. He walked with his usual calm, careful steps, and the coat that had become familiar to the owner was draped over his shoulders again. Worn and patched, but carrying a certain dignity, there was a quiet determination in his eyes, a sense that today would mark a turning point. He didn't look around at the customers much, only paused near the piano, letting his gaze linger on the familiar keys. The owner approached him slowly. "It's good to see you," he said softly. "Would you like to play again?" The man shook his head gently. "Not right now," he said. I wanted to talk with you first, if that's okay." "Of course," the owner replied, gesturing toward the small table nearby. "Sit down." The man lowered himself onto the chair, folding his hands in front of him. His gaze was quiet, thoughtful. I wanted to thank you," he said. "Not just for the meals, but for everything else. For letting me play, for listening, for seeing me as more than what people see on the streets. That has meant more than I can say." The owner nodded, understanding. "It's not much," he said softly. "But it's what anyone should do. Everyone deserves to be seen for who they are, not just for their circumstances." The man's eyes softened and he smiled faintly. I've been given chances before," he began, "but they never lasted." "People,"